What exactly happened down there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I talked to him and blah, blah, blah. He asked about you guys and da-da-da-da-da, more questions, blah, blah, blah.
Christopher, thank you for coming on the show today. We're excited about this. This is our first game
developer.
What am I trying to say?
Oh,
there we go,
fun.
developer.
Yeah.
I get the honor of being the first. Oh, that's great. Thank you.
We've had
Yeah, we're
authors.
excited about it.
We had authors and artists and a superhero, but it's kind of cool, you know. I grew up wanting to be a game developer, so it's kind of cool to get to, you know, not quite what I was aiming, but it's pretty close, you know.
I love to see it. I mean, I'm almost a superhero, so like game developer, it's in the same category, basically.
Similar vibes, yeah. I mean, he was a massive nerd. He would have he fits the area.
So is the last name again, since we're it's Bodegård? You said you had a hard time pronouncing your name.
My dad always the classic thing he would always say is bodyguard. He goes, "Oh, hello, I'm bodyguard, Mr. Bodyguard."
Okay, it's kind of cool actually.
You can say it however you want. It's just funny either way. As long as it's funny.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, where are you located at?
I am currently in the city of Skövde, which is a small city like in the middle of Sweden. It's like the two largest cities in Sweden are Stockholm and Gothenburg, and I think so. And Skövde is like right in between them on the train rail. So that's it's like in the middle.
Yeah, it's amazing technology that we can be sitting here talking with you, recording this.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We've had several on from all over. We've had some from Italy, and so what we're trying to do is make good friends. So when we go travel, we'll have a place to stay. So we're going to mark Sweden off of our list.
Exactly.
We've got a place to stay now.
Perfect. Yes, there's a wonderful little place that there's like barely anybody living here. We have like a population of 50,000 or so, but we have the largest per capita number of game developers in pretty much. Well, in Sweden for one, but also like it's up there in the world because we have such a small town and so many game developers. It's crazy.
Well, I have a lot of questions about that. I'm really interested in what you're doing. So I'm a little older than you guys, and I started back when there was a game called Bard's Tale on a Commodore 64, if you can believe that. Yeah. And then went from there into the first original Final Fantasy. And, from there, things kind of blew up, and I tried to keep up. And I watched a little bit of your game that we're going to talk about today, and it reminded me a little bit of, that big Final Fantasy feel, kind of.
Well, you're going CRPG, which, I mean, we're talking about the roots, like the roots of RPGs, that's out there, CRPGs, like, the original Baldur's Gate and stuff like that. So you kind of are harkening back towards that genre or that time period with this genre or this game.
Honestly, the entire RPG genre, the history of it is so absolutely fascinating. The whole split between JRPG and Western RPG or like CRPG, whatever you want to call it. It's such an interesting story. I really love that stuff.
So would you say that, just a little off tangent, I guess, would you say a Japanese RPG is defined by being made in Japan? Or do you think it's something like a method to how it's made?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like contained within that for sure. They have an entire different architecture to like get those games made. But specifically, it's just the fact that like when D&D arrived in Japan, from what I understand, they went in the direction of like I think it was wizardry, right? I don't remember the exact year, but like they had an entire different philosophy on how to tell stories. Which is like it's so interesting to see today, especially with games like the biggest game of last year, Expedition 33, because that's a JRPG made in France, and they do exactly that thing, and they do it really well. So it is really just just like this isn't a Swedish RPG necessarily. It is definitely just a CRPG, narrative RPG. And that's it's just how you make them and not necessarily how but it is a marketing question specifically because your audience is going to come and tell you what your game is no matter what you do with it at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I think if someone went to Esoteric Ebb wanting a Final Fantasy 15 experience, they're not, it's a very different kind of game.
disappointment. The disappointment would be insane.
But then you've marketed it as a disco-like, and I am a massive.
It's very
Disco
dangerous to do
Elysium
that.
fan.
Like marketing,
It
I
is,
always say that marketing is like such a big part of game development, because if you market it in a certain way, you're gonna get an audience that want a certain game, and if you don't give them what they want in that case, it doesn't matter how good your game is. If they expect Tetris and you give them Zork, they're gonna be disappointed, no matter if it's the best Zork in the world. So,
So with the term disco-like,
happens.
Did you feel restricted? Like, did you feel like you had to make it more like Disco Elysium, or did you feel like you got exactly what you want out of that term, and it fit what you wanted to make anyways?
It's a difficult balance, because on the one hand, you don't want to just be the cheap version of the greatest game of all time, which you can argue that Disco Elysium is one of the greatest.
I would
it's
agree.
really, it's really stupid to say that I'm gonna do. I'm a solo developer, which for a time at least, and I'm gonna take on the biggest game. I'm gonna do it by myself. Super stupid thing to do, but it's also one of those things where you get an inbuilt audience if you say, I'm gonna make Tetris 2, a spiritual successor to Tetris, let's say. You get the inbuilt Tetris audience, and that's really good if you're able to prove that it's something interesting to that audience. But there's always going to be a percentage of the hardcore Tetris fans that will not like whatever it is you do if you just make any changes to it at all. So it's a balance, and I think Ebb was an experiment. I think it hit on a lot of notes really well. I think I could have done a lot of things better now with hindsight.
2020,
that's why I'm so excited for
always the case.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just fun to see and learn from it. I love reading all the different opinions on the game. That's the best part about releasing a game.
Well, I've
So I'm going to jump in here real quick.
Go ahead.
Coming from the area of not as in touch with what you got going on, I had to quiz I've got a lot going on myself right now, so I was trying to get caught up on today's podcast with Tristan. I'm like, okay, so what is this? What is it? What is an indie game? I know what an indie film is. Is it, all those things there. So I have a lot of questions like that. You said you were independent, I guess, and solo. So you pretty much do everything?
So it's a strange situation, because like when it comes to indie development in games, it's a term that's very, very broad. It's similar. It's become more similar to something like indie music, where it's more like a genre than an actual development style. Although it is still very much a thing of just, hey, if you're not a massively funded game studio with AAA development budget, you're pretty much ending up in the indie space or whatever.
Was it we were talking about earlier? Expedition 33 had a lot of controversy.
Big debate about that.
Yeah, because it's classified as an indie game, but last year it won Game of the Year, and this is like you look at the graphics and such, as it is as it has as refined as something like I'm trying to think of a big AAA game. Yeah, Final Fantasy. It's weird going into that as an indie game, because it's a really good game for when I've not played it. I should, but it doesn't.
Me neither. I have to play it. It's very embarrassing.
Hey, same, man. Yeah.
Yeah, me neither. Just saying.
But to answer your question, the thing is, I started out as a solo developer because I was like, I'd done a previous company with a bunch of people, and that didn't work out, and I wanted to okay, for my next thing, I wanted to start out small. I wanted to do everything myself. I wanted to see if I could do everything myself, and it turns out I could, but not very well. So I managed to put together a game that was like, it had most of the stuff that worked, but the visuals, because it was made by me, were kind of bad. So my pitch to all the publishers were basically, hey, give me money so I can hire artists to make the game look better, because the stuff inside is kind of cool. And then I got the money eventually from a publisher, and just hired all the amazing artists that I found around me, and rest is history.
So less of a company, more of just a bunch of freelancers coming together. Like you kind of just found you picked and that's a
yeah. So
I've never seen a game come together like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I'm a member of an incubator, and we have a bunch of companies around, and they work on their own games. But since money's tight, everybody kind of liked my idea. I managed to recruit a bunch of people to just work on my thing, which was really fun for a while. and they, without them, the game would never exist. So I'm very careful with like making clear that even though I don't own them, they are not my developers. They are my collaborators. That's the term I tend to use. So
Makes sense.
Always.
Yeah, I think that
they're awesome.
worked out very
Let
well
me
for
catch
you.
up
The
with you on
sound.
that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, let me catch up with you a little bit on that. So how does this work similar to, I guess, a lot of other development processes where you have a prototype, you pitch that, and you get a budget from someone? Is that kind of what you do to get this started? Yeah, because you said you had something and you showed it to your, I'm guessing the money people, and they're like, and you said, I need money to get people to help me make this better. So did you have like a prototype that comes out and then you build off of that?
Yes, basically, it's different for everybody, and everybody goes on a different journey. But you can kind of like, depending on how you want to do it, you can build big companies, and you can look for investment, and do all sort of things. But one of the basic sort of indie game dev paths is to make your game by yourself or like with your friends, and not have any money potentially, probably, and desperately try to scramble to get that one prototype, as you say, together, something playable, something fun. You put it up on Steam, because Steam is the place to show off games, and that's where you get your spread. And potentially you get a demo out. Just something playable, isn't done, that proves that your game has viability. And then you use the numbers that you get from those wish lists on Steam, as they call it, to go to publishers and go, hey, people want my game, people like our game, and we need this much money to finish it. And that's usually how it goes. And it tends to be like a question of how much you need to finish your game before anybody gives you money. And when the industry is a bit worse off, economically speaking, usually publishers won't actually sign with your game until you have 90% of it already done. And you're like, you need a little bit of money to get it off the finish line. So it's always a question of when do you actually get money, and is it worth it, and all of those things.
Yeah.
A lot of risk involved then.
Oh, yeah.
You could just put your heart, soul, and all this time into something, and then it never get off the ground, and a lot of work with that too.
I've been there before. So on this, when you put it up on Steam and then you basically put your demo up there, does it change much after that? After you already need the things you need to work on, but do you get feedback from people and you're like, oh yeah, maybe we should go that direction?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's it depends. Some developers are. It's always dangerous to listen too much to your players. Sometimes they can be really, really useful. Sometimes you can go in the wrong direction. It's one of those classic things of you might have heard it. The I don't remember who said it or whatever, but you should listen to what people say, their emotions, their opinions, but you should never take their advice. You should never listen to feedback in that sense. Something like that. So it's always a question of seeing what hits and what gains you numbers, and then when it comes to the marketing, like we talked about before, what do you even call your game? Because usually, especially when you're in the indie space and you're very small, your only way to get visibility is if you can say it's this game and this game together. It's this thing you already like, but in a different package. One of the largest indie games of all time is Stardew Valley, which is arguably just a game that, just with big quotation marks, took a game that was really popular, a game series called Harvest Moon, which is about being a farmer, basically. And the one guy took that idea and was like, okay, well, there has been no good Harvest Moon game out for 20 years, or maybe 15. I want to make a Harvest Moon game. And then he made the best Harvest Moon game possible when there were no others in the market. And it just blew up, and he became very, very rich from that. And today there are lots of those games out because he proved that was basically a viable thing to do. And that's usually how it goes, kind of in the subgenres. It's one thing that nobody really touches, and then everybody wants it afterwards. So,
I think there is something to be said though about the strategy of making what you want to see in the market. Not necessarily chasing what is everyone's asking for, not chasing the big thing, but saying, man, I really liked this franchise. It sucks that there's nothing left in it. I'll make my own thing, and then it's actual passion there. Now I know you mentioned Disco Elysium and Pillars of Eternity. as your main references. Was this like that for you? Was this, man, I want another game like this in the market? We're not getting a Disco Elysium anytime soon. Pillars of Eternity, I don't think has had a game since like 2010. So was that a desire to fill that gap, like it was Stardew Valley, or is it where did this come from?
Oh, it's definitely a filling the gap situation of specifically that type of game that is narrative focused CRPG. There are lots of role-playing games, really amazing games that I love, but specifically what I am looking for, because it's one of I like strategy games and I like narrative role-playing games. Those are like my two genres. I don't want to work in Grand Strat, so I'm making role-playing games. And specifically I want games that have really, really interactive writing. Like, I want writing that is extremely dynamic, has very, very engaging style of interactivity with callbacks and different branching paths. And all of that is like the reason why there aren't that many games of that type that come out is, in my theory, is simply the fact that they are extremely difficult to do. It's like writing a good narrative to begin with, especially in a game where there are so many technical limitations, is difficult on its own, and then doing that and attempting to do it in an extremely interactive way, like Disco Elysium, is genuinely extremely difficult to pull off. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I feel like at some point it's like it almost becomes even impressive to make a coherent narrative while trying to make it extremely interactive, kind of. It's one of the reasons why on Steam the two genres that are, from what I understand, the most like profitable per the amount of versions of that genre that release on Steam every day or whatever are strategy games and role-playing games. And that's because those two genres, from what I understand, are the most like kind of difficult to just get a basic version of it out that works. So there's something to be said about that specific genre just being very difficult to sort of get out the door, even.
So I had a question. This is from I would say, ignorant point of view. Not that I'm ignorant in the world, but ignorant to what you do. And I've often wondered, when you're playing a game and you see the visuals there, but when you're developing that game, are you just basically looking at like code? How does that process work? Do they have? I'm really interested in that part, and I know a lot of other people might be. How that works, and do you have like programs you use, or give me a broad version of how that works.
For sure, like so I'm originally like a writer, and I hated programming. And then at some point, somebody told me I went to university here in Skövde for game writing specifically, which is like it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, and it's kind of a very specific program that usually doesn't net you a job. So I was told very early on, learn something else, and I chose programming. So I do program everything in. I work in the Unity engine specifically, which is one of the big video game engines. Very, very standard piece of software. And then what I do is I work with another open source tool for my interactive dialogues called InkScript. Is the ink made by a company called Inkle. And I love Inkle, they are amazing. And I am using their open source engine of this interactive scripting language to customizing that and then turning that into the stuff that I work with. And the way it kind of works is essentially that you have you have a linear progression from top to bottom that is just dialogue line after line, sort of like a manuscript in a screenplay. But then all of a sudden, in that order of lines, you all of a sudden have branching paths where you have indents with pluses, and then you have lines that the player gets to input in order to choose a different path that you go down in this linear narrative. So you split it off. And then you have some cool syntax with that allows you to jump in between different parts of that dialogue. And then you have tags on each line that allows you to do customized stuff with the rest of the engine. And just those basic features allows you to do some incredibly crazy stuff, like hopping from different parts depending on what you've done before, reacting to variables in my story variable system, allowing animations to trigger depending on what's happening in the story, doing cutscenes, like all of that happening in just this scripting language. And it just branches up from there, basically.
I've never really considered the complexity of having to consider, I kicked this bucket at the beginning of the game. Now I'm talking to the guy right before the final boss. And, there's dialogue referencing that bucket that wouldn't have been there if I didn't choose to kick the bucket. So, like, you have to consider how to get that from there to there. And that, I guess that would kind of require its own software, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and you're also, seems like you're telling a kind of unlimited story. You're not just saying this is the story, because of all the variations that each player can make has to be taken into consideration. And I guess there's some type of so if I'm not mistaken, your game, you're going to start out, you build a character. Am I right?
Kind of.
Follow through. Yeah. And then based on how you build that character is how it reacts to the game. So there's going to be a lot of dice rolling here, I guess, similar in a way. So there's going to be variations, and that's got to be a challenge to try to make sure all that works well together.
Yes.
There's not a blip in the road where, I never thought somebody would want to be this type of character and this type of this and only have so much of this. Now they can't even get past the first bridge.
You did make it a little easier on yourself, which I think was smart, by pulling, from what both not Pillars of Eternity. I've been saying Pillars of Eternity, haven't I? What is the other? What is that? Planescape and Disco Elysium both did. Yes, where you customize your stats, but your character, like the backstory of your character and who he is already decided. You're kind of just deciding how he's, what parts of him are coming through now, which I think does help. You don't have to consider what if the player chose to be like in Baldur's Gate 3, for example, great game.
Yes.
I played a Githyanki my first playthrough, and the game did not take that into account at all. I was in I was talking to the goddess of the Githyanki people, and my character, there was no dialogue. My character had no thoughts on meeting her literal queen / goddess. She was just kind of standing there. And I think that's a lot to take into account when you already have different classes you can pick, or versions of the class, the cleric. But when you have to consider so many things, it makes it so much harder to keep it from falling apart. And
it's a balance between sort of immersion and actual narrative coherence, sort of.
Absolutely.
So if you're unable to, because making your own character adds so much depth to being able to feel like you're actually inputting into the world. It's my character, I'm doing my way. But if you're leaning towards the more authorial, intent-driven narrative where everything's supposed to react to everything, and even the smallest, like you say, blip sort of becomes an annoyance where you feel like the game just isn't real anymore. That's where the trouble comes in, because you really can't, at least with reasonable resources, tell a coherent story if you're wanting to do both of those at the same time. Like Baldur's Gate 3 succeeds because they managed to basically structure up a story where you have very, very few of those blips, and that's the genius of that game in general, because they have structured the entire game to essentially avoid them. To be smart and be able to put you in a situation where pretty much any character works in general, like 90% of the time. It just works smooth. Whilst in Esoteric Ebb specifically, the entire narrative is built around this character that you're playing as, just like Planescape Torments in Disco Elysium. And if you were to remove that character from the story and add someone else, or even like switch certain variables in that character's backstory, all of a sudden the entire theme and the entire the point of the game sort of just kind of unravels. It's one of those questions that you get asked often, like, why can't you play this game as a female version of the main character, for example? Sometimes it works perfectly. Mass Effect is a great example, where you're able to customize the protagonist in certain ways, but you're always still going to be that Commander Shepard character. Whilst in Esoteric Ebb, for example, all of the themes are so interlaced in the fact that the protagonist is exactly the kind of character that the protagonist is, that you can't really change it without fundamentally changing the experience.
I mean, I've not beaten the game by any means. I'm not even through day one. I was taking my time because I want to enjoy the game. I've also just been caught up with so many things lately. I've been wanting to play more. I'm near the end of day one. Yeah, the cleric is like who he is very integral. Like, I mean, yeah, you mentioned themes of like masculinity. It actually, the game really explores that, and it's the cleric being this kind of not dumb but bumbling guy who is also in a lot of ways really in touch with himself and who he is, just might not be aware of that, like, which sounds contradictory, is very key. This character who has been part of the City Watch, who has these ideas of nationalism and these ideas of what it means to be a soldier and protect people, but also has to reconcile that with this idea of, can I go too far with that? Am I hurting these people? Am I creating this? Am I pushing other people down to push up this idea of who I am? And I think you do. I mean, little off topic, but I was playing Esoteric Ebb and was talking to a friend at the same time, and I ended up sending them a whole just impromptu random essay I wrote about elements of like masculinity and America and all that, just because the game that brought that out in me. So,
and that's the fun part, like getting
absolutely.
that sort of being able to think about different themes in different ways, and the fact that like this game is obviously written from sort of my perspective as a guy living in Sweden specifically, and there's a bunch of stuff that like relates to Swedish politics, for example. But the fact that it also applies, even though I I try to specifically avoid like touching too much upon American zeitgeist stuff, for example, even though that's impossible because Sweden is a part of the American zeitgeist.
Yeah,
it's very interesting because everybody gets a different experience of it. Sort of.
I think also like even if you wrote, like, for example, if I wrote something with the intent of American zeitgeist, someone could play that game, say from South Africa or China or anywhere in the world. And there's going to be some elements that relate because we're all human. There's going to be some things that say, oh, yes, this comes from, I don't fully understand the geopolitics behind this reference, but I still understand as this kind of person in this kind of situation.
Fantasy allegory helps a lot with that too.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, how long does something like this take? From the day that you tell your best friend, hey, I'm going to develop a game, to releasing it? How does that and is it a full-time job?
Yeah, that's a horrifying question, I would say,
yeah,
because
that's what
it's one of those things where I started on my first prototype on this basically in October of 2018. So that was like the first spark of wanting to do a D&D Planescape Torment game, sort of like see if I could do that myself. And I couldn't. I didn't have the skills at the time. But then I tried to do a prototype, completely failed, and I was like, well, I can't do an RPG by myself because I'm specifically bad at doing combat. I can't handle the combat aspect of it. And you cannot sell a role-playing game without combat. That's just not possible in like CRPG genre. Yeah. And then so I scrapped that entire project, the Ebb RPG project, as I call it. And then 3 months later, Disco Elysium comes out, and they don't have traditional combat. They managed to do everything that's amazing about CRPGs and fix a bunch of problems that I had with it when it comes to like interactive storytelling in general. And they did it without doing traditional combat. And that inspired me to the point where I was like, okay, cool. A bit foolhardy probably to be able to say, well, I could do that by myself in my dark room. Yeah. So I sat and for about 3-4 more years and did that. Just did prototypes by myself on the sideline while I was doing a bunch of freelancing gigs, some app development stuff, some writing. And eventually, after slamming my head against the keyboard for literally years, it eventually turned into something that was good enough to kind of show people. And that was in 2022. And ever since then, that's when I ran out of gigs to actually get a job. So I tried getting a normal job. I couldn't find a job because of the economy, I guess. And lucky me, because instead what I did was I burned all my savings for years, still looking for a job, mind you, and just kept working on this thing on the side, which eventually then turned into something that was actually functional. And it's part luck, of course, and it's part just the fact that I'm extremely stubborn. But it took basically kind of 8 years of development.
That's a lot. And I can imagine how many times you played the game just to make sure you ran through it, and it doesn't. And then you get almost through it, and then you find a new little problem that you got to fix.
Oh
Do
yeah,
you,
every day. Today I found a bug and I had to fix
Oh,
a thing.
no.
And we helped fix it. Oh my god, it's just all the time. I get emails from people who are like, "I found this little thing," and I'm like, "God damn it, thank you so much. God damn it."
So, saying that, I guess that's a little easier nowadays because when you release a game, you have the opportunity to go back in and fix a bug, right? Whereas back years ago, when every games came out on CDs, it was there, man, and it was out there, and you couldn't do a thing about it. Yeah,
It's crazy
that's something you don't think about.
that even like if I buy a disc game, like a physical copy of a game, and there's a glitch, they can alter the game still. They can say, "Oh, we're gonna send you an online patch." Yeah, I don't understand how that works. Somehow that's insane to me.
I love stories about, especially like I'm watching a great retrospective from a YouTuber called Madular right now, wherein he goes over the entire development cycle and the history of the Ultima series, which is, you know, the grandfather of CRPGs essentially in the West. I love hearing about stuff like that because obviously game development is so different in the fact that when you released a game back in the day on those CDs, on those floppies even, you could potentially release patches, but it was a weird situation, and it's not. It's you had to assume that at least what 90% of your player base are never going to see that patch. So if you release a game and it's a bit early and you didn't have time to fix it, it's done. It's just gone already. And I can tell you for sure that if Esoteric Ebb was still in the state that it was in when I released 1.0, the game, I mean, it would be playable, but it would be very, very janky. And I am certain that reviewers take that into account because I know the reviewers were very lucky, I think, because I was like praying that they wouldn't run into the many, many bugs that were in 1.0. And then I was like working nonstop before and after launch to just fix as many bugs as I could every single day. Crazy to be able to do that. And it's actually a hotfix. Yeah.
There's a lot less room for jank in a story RPG, like a story CRPG, than say an open world RPG. Because like in say Skyrim, for example, when I was juggling a dragon skeleton around the necromancy spell because the game didn't take that into account, that was fun. That added to the experience. It broke the immersion, but it was fun. But there's only like CRPGs are such a
Well,
it's so much dialogue. Yeah, there's not a lot.
It's like a Matrix, you know. It's just when something like that happens, you're just like, oh, that was just a blip in the Matrix. But when you're in a story and the story's playing out, I would say a bug there would really pull you out of the story. You know,
and there isn't a lot of ways I could imagine a glitch in a CRPG could be fun. Like I can think of one example, which we've talked about a lot, Disco Elysium. There is a relatively common glitch where you'll open the game up and Kim, your partner, will just be spinning around, and it's kind of goofy. So I've seen it a few times. But like,
that so happens to one of the companions in Ebb too, potentially.
I hope to see it then. I hope don't patch that out. That's key. I hope to see it.
So once you got to that point where you're the 1.0, are you sending it to friends? Let me know what you think about this. Do you do a lot of collaboration there as well? Like, just play the game, man. I want to know what you think.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I have a really good friends group of like people that will tell me what they actually think. Like they will be genuinely harsh and critique it and be honest, which is really good. So incredibly useful. They will actually like. It doesn't mean that their opinions are always correct. Sometimes I am a bit too artsy for them potentially, but usually they are a perfect representation of different types of gamers. And if you can get them to like something unanimously, that means that you're probably going to get pretty decent reviews on Steam, which it ended up doing because of that, potentially. So yes, absolutely, just get as much feedback as possible from as many people as that like want to give you attention. It's just amazing. And doing a bunch of early playtests and demos also help a ton with that.
Now, was there a moment when your playtesters... Because I imagine at first, a lot of them were like, okay, this is Christopher's pet project. This is my friend's project he likes doing. Was there a moment where it clicked in, you saw that click where they, wait a second. No, this is actually something. It's not, I have to try his thing. Okay, really?
I have a perfect moment. I mean, I have basically a mentor, the guy who told me to do something other than writing when I started game writing here, for example. I sent the very early playtest to him, like one of the first, before I even showed it to anyone online. And he played it for like 15 minutes, And he's the kind of guy that he's going to be very honest, first of all, and he's going to be very subdued with anything positive. So the first thing he said when he responded to that after playing for like 30 minutes was, this is pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
That's when I knew I had something. I was like, okay, I'm hooked. Yeah. This is gonna work if I'm able to continue on this.
So, and I know Tristan's asking more of the actual gameplay, and I'm asking more of the kind of development side of it. But so Steam, you put it up there, you get your numbers up, you find someone to back you, kind of, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Once you get a good response from Steam, is there a way to market it on Steam to get people? I know you did say by using certain keywords you're going to bring people in. Is that, or is there other ways you can get people on Steam to even just check it out?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like, Steam is such an interesting sort of job by itself, and because it's such a complete monolith in PC gaming, not just indie, but like for actual big publishers too, you need to be on Steam to make money. And it's to the point where we haven't released Esoteric Ebb on any other platforms. We want to do that in the future, but it's not worth it because the time spent to do all these other platforms are like, oh, maybe you can increase your sales by 2%. But 98% is going to happen on Steam. So first of all, that's how it works on the industry for pretty much anybody right now. Steam is such a monolith. But the actual store itself, the only thing you do before launch specifically, like after launch, there's a few more things. But the only way for you to get attention to your game early on is to bring attention in from everywhere else on the internet, sending out links, talking with streamers, like sending emails and trying to get them to play and stream it, show it off on YouTube, doing the whole social media thing and trying to get as much attention as possible, any type of attention really. That's the only way to make it out of the swamp of not being seen on Steam. And then once you get over a certain line, you can sometimes get a boost in the algorithm. I ended up getting that at a point where I was like, after 1.5 years of doing that swamp fight, I had about 8,000 wishlist, and I managed to get one journalist at PC Gamer to write an article about the game. And there was just like, I didn't expect anything huge from that, but he liked it so much that he basically wrote a preview that just said, "This looks like an amazing game. Go play it," because the demo was out. And that one article ended up boosting my Steam page in the Steam algorithm to the point where it ended up in a thing called the discovery queue. So it's like handed out to people, and then the algorithm checks how many of those people actually click on it, as in, they did check it, like A/B testing. And my game ended up working out very well there. So over the course of 1.5 years to get 8,000 wishlists, which is really good, like that's a solid numbers. But in just 2 weeks, I ended up getting 30,000 additional wishlists.
Wow.
Which just blew everything up. And that was the point where I was able to get a publisher. Because there's, depending on what sort of game we're talking about, but usually if you get over 10, 20,000 wishlists, especially if you do it in a short period of time, that's when publishers go, oh, there's something here that works. Cool. Do you want some money?
Yeah. So they're going to let you do all the hard work and the stress and the late nights and the waiting and the waiting and the waiting, and then they're going to cash in on the end. Yeah,
that's because everybody
when you've done all the marketing and everything. Yeah,
yes,
that's the way it works, man. I've been there a few times too. So
another thing,
it's different, different road but same journey. Same thing.
Another thing I've noticed with a lot of, especially just not necessarily just video games, but indie projects in general. It's kind of weird, but it's interesting how prominent it's become is Discord. Like, so many projects have a Discord. And, you'll have the creator of the project talking to you. And it's weird because that is such a new concept, I have to imagine. Sure, you might get lucky and George R.R. Martin would have replied to your fan mail on his website. But, there wasn't really a direct way to contact these creators until now, where you have like that superhero we had on, he has a Discord group where you can get on this guy's Discord and talk to him. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this sort of ability to create this very specified community has come into play for indie development.
It has 100%. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You go ahead. You're more on that.
it has basically entirely taken over the classic forum post. And I prefer the forum. It's so much better to just be able to search stuff on Google and actually find it. I am a part of a few older forums. But Discord has taken over that entirely, for good and bad. And it's also like replaced, sort of, not replaced, because the mailing list is still very useful. It's a great tool. I never did a mailing list. I probably should have. It would have been smart. But Discord took over that. So it's like a place for hardcore fans to just be able to get information about the project and just go there whenever they want to find something, find out anything about it, and get a ping from the stuff in order to just get information about it. It's a great way to reach out.
I was watching a podcast, and it was talking about AI and, you know, the fears that people have about replacement of jobs and things like that. And they went back through time and talked about how every time we think there's something going to completely obliterate our job market, it actually does do away with some jobs, but then it creates tenfold more jobs. And one of the examples they gave was, if you would have went back in time and went to some of the large, you know, movie producers and some of the television, the classic NBC, CBS, you know, the three stations that, you know, all us old guys, that's all we had, and told them that in the future, you're going to have thousands upon thousands of small little studios across, reaching out with just individual type of content to individuals. We would have thought that was crazy. And so, yes, YouTube and things like that took the place of those traditional ways of media. However, look at how many more opportunities it's opened up. And I think that's what we're seeing with what you're doing. You know, the games, same thing. You know, you had these big, huge, I don't think anybody thought that gaming would go where it went. Most people thought it was a fad. But then all of a sudden, you know, they've captured so big of a part of the market right now, and now you're starting to see. This is one of my first experiences seeing someone, you know, creating that own, you know, again, creating more jobs. So that's a real interesting way to look, I think, at the future of how we're going.
Absolutely.
So, talking about the future, yeah, So, how does this? You know, are there going to be, so Tristan and I were talking briefly before you came on, is there like gaming awards and for just independent, something, you know, not like Gamer of the Year where you're going against, you know, all the big developers?
An indie game did win Game of the Year last year, though, so it's not completely out of question to be the game as an indie game anymore.
Yeah, because I can imagine that's going to launch you into the stratosphere once you start winning those awards. Possibly.
What I'm seeing, there are various indie awards, and I've kind of been following the sort of indie scene lately. It's early in the year. I think right now, if they held the indie game of the year, you would win. I don't think there's anything right now that has you beat. So, I mean, it could change. We have a long year ahead of us, but I think you currently have that one.
I think
from everyone that you talk
to. Like, narrative-wise, absolutely. I would say that's probably a decent argument. But then you also have, like, Slay the Spire 2, sequel to a massively successful game, and we released, like, 2 days before they released, which is funny. We originally wanted to release on the same day, but then they announced it, and we were like, oh, no, let's move it! Whoop! Which probably saved the launch quite a bit. And then we have Mugenics, which is not a sequel, but like a, you know, continuation of one of the greatest indie game developers of all time. Yeah, it's just, so there's so many games releasing this year in particular, indie games specifically, and like Slay the Spire 2, it's the, you know, the news stories talk about how they outsold Marathon, which is the huge game from Bungie, developers of Halo. It's just indie games really do entirely eat a huge chunk of the Steam cake because for a bunch of different reasons. So it almost becomes ridiculous to even compare it. And the same thing with the Silk Song last year, which is a sequel to.
That was a big controversy, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a big thing. And specifically, these teams are still small. Like Slay the Spire, Megacrit, they small studio. They I think they're like 10 people or something like that. They are probably, you know, about the same size as the development team of Esoteric Ebb, for example. but they are still making gangbusters. They are absolutely massive. And mostly because they're sequels, you usually need to prove yourself. A sequel to Esoteric Ebb would probably do a lot better than Esoteric Ebb would ever do it. Like from an initial standpoint, you need to build it up over time to prove that it's not just another, tiny indie game. It's something huge.
Has that
so
prestige.
It's gonna be interesting to see very much.
I think that's
but
that the idea of that tiny indie game too. That's a new thing too. Like back in the day, if Nintendo released a video game, well, it was a video game, and there was prestige behind that. You knew that it was going to be something of quality, and I think it's one of the side effects of being so open to so many creators is I can go on Steam and I can find the most unprofessional, barely put together asset flip of a game, and it will probably have a bunch of malware in it, and it'll be on there right next to games like Esoteric Ebb and AAA games. So there is that push. I mean, I've not created a game, so I can't tell for sure, but I imagine there has to be that fight to prove that you are actually legitimate.
For sure. And Steam does, my personal opinion, and everybody has different opinions on it, but I think Steam is a wonderful platform, at least right now, when it comes to this. Because the thing is that they allow anybody to get on it, so it's very egalitarian in that way. But then they have like two different versions of Steam. They have the standard Steam, which is just anybody gets in and nobody gets any actual push from the algorithm usually. And then we have the second curated Steam, which is where 90+% of all the money is made, where Steam actually cares what is being shown or not, so that Steam looks like it's an actual proper storefront and not just a place where anybody can drop, like you said, any kind of game at all. AI slop games and stuff like that, it can be included.
Big now, yeah.
And Esoteric Ebb, when it got that initial push with the wishlist, that's basically when it got a taste of like, okay, cool, let's try Esoteric Ebb out. Algorithm did in the actual like real store of Steam for like a couple of weeks and see what happens. And Esoteric Ebb sort of blew up because of that. So it was like proven at that point that this is a game that people seem to like it for whatever reason. And
now,
then that keeps going over time.
I think the ultimate sign for prestige for a new game, especially an indie game that starts off on something like Steam, is a physical copy. Will we ever see a physical copy, like a special edition of Esoteric Ebb?
So that's the thing. It's probably never going to happen for PC. If we end up doing consoles, we could do a console physical release because that's like a separate thing. But there's really no... it's very, very almost difficult to do a PC release. It's to the point where I think when like indie development studios do physical releases of PC, they usually do stuff like a fake cartridge with a USB stick.
Yeah,
because it's like, why would you do nobody has a CD drive. Why would you do a CD?
Right.
So it's a bit silly that way.
So is it a big leap jumping from PC to console?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. So it's look, from what I have never developed a game in the
Tristan,
90s.
just so you know, he's saying all of my questions are good questions. I'm just
They are very good
there.
questions.
I don't even know what the hell I'm talking about. Go ahead,
It's
sir.
funny
Go ahead,
because
sir.
from what I understand, in the 90s, it's a nightmare to do different platforms in general. Just doing PC for one, because what you do is essentially you kind of almost remake the game from scratch when it comes to like the core infrastructure for every single platform in order to get it to work. It's to the point where when you would port it from something like from Commodore 64 to God, I have names in my head, but like to another platform, you would have to make the game from scratch. You can't just take the code and copy it over. It's like it won't work. Today, you can do that because usually, if you're doing your own engine, I know it's a lot more complicated. But when you're working with, like I do in Unity, ignoring the fact that stuff is usually going to bug out on you, it's mostly a case of paying the license so you get access to the button, and then pressing the button, and then you get a build that's supposed to work, and you have to have dev kit too, and then you just get a build that works on Xbox or PlayStation or Switch too. Of course, that build is going to probably crash on start because you have a bunch of stuff that you need to fix. So the porting process is still like a technical thing you have to handle. But beyond that, it's just it's so incredibly efficient these days that it's usually more of a bureaucratic issue than anything else, because Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo are, unlike Steam, actually kind of careful of, not super careful, but more careful of what they put on their storefronts. So you need to go through an entire process of getting certified, which will take time. And then you'll have to make sure that the thing you're releasing is actually functional, that even stuff like showing the right prompts in your UI, so that if you have, for example, PlayStation controller prompts for pressing buttons on an Xbox release, Microsoft is going to go, what are you doing? What the hell? You're not allowed to go on our thing. So all of that stuff needs to be is a lot of work, but compared to how it was back in the day when you had to literally remake stuff from scratch just to get it to work, it is super easy. It's to the point where I can do it, and I don't know anything. So that's usually where I put it.
On the topic, I remember back in the day, like around let's say 2012, you'd have a game release, you have a version for the PlayStation, version for the Xbox, version for the Wii, and then you'd have a version for the DS or the 3DS.
Yes.
And it was an entirely different game. Like they would go from, oh, you have a action RPG, well now it's a 3D platformer. Like I remember several games that were like, it's had the same title and everything, completely
and a different studio.
game.
They usually have different studios making those versions
So
too.
strange. Yeah.
Very interesting.
But
So
we see that. We see it at hack and slash esoteric ebb on 3DS. Coming when
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like that doesn't happen anymore. Like that entire like business thing just went away at some point during like the 2010s. Same thing with licensed video games. We don't see video games for movies anymore because it's just not a thing that it doesn't sell anymore. Just like physical games don't sell anymore, really.
that was your AI slop of the day, wasn't it? Like I remember playing Penguins of Madagascar on my Game Boy Advance, and it's like my like 7-year-old brain was like, this is good. This is Nintendo, but like, yeah, it was a
studios
horrible
who made
game.
those games. It's a fascinating story to read about that because it's studios basically making games because it's a thing you do. You make it for a paycheck. You get a deal. It's not necessarily. It is art, absolutely, and so many of those games are amazing. But it's specifically a thing you do as a studio to sort of stay alive. And maybe eventually, once you've done enough of those Madagascar games, you'll be able to do that one game that the studio kind of wants to do. Which is a fascinating thing to think about too. Yeah.
Never really considered that. Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Well, I watch. I just recently. I watch a lot of movies that are about real, like how people made it. And I watched Blackberry, which has been out for a long time now. And I
love that movie. So good.
Yeah, it seems to be a similar situation in most all cases. You have the creative, and then you have the business, and they're completely different people. But the creative, there was a saying that they said that I picked up on. He said it's got to be perfect, and then the guy said, you do realize that perfect is the enemy of good. And I was like, that's a marketer there. That's somebody that's get it out there, let's go. And you're being pushed by both sides. Did you call this the backer, or is that the producer, or what is that actual agency called?
Oh,
my
publisher.
One that picks you up. Publisher,
yes. So
okay.
basically,
so
there are a bunch of different ways to get. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. Are they giving you any kind of, hey, why don't you do it this way, or why don't you? Are they giving that kind of thing there, going dangling the dollar, going, if you'll just,
it's a classic.
Let the character drink a Coke.
Exactly. Like, it's so interesting to read about different experiences with game developers have with different publishers, because publishers they tend to be horror stories, generally speaking, partly because of what you say there. It can be a case of like the publisher wanting to make sure that the developers don't just take the money and make something that's insane and crazy, or worse, won't sell.
Yeah,
but so one of the things that I wanted to do was specifically, I waited for a long time to make sure that the publisher I signed with was specifically one that I could, almost guarantee would not mess up the game for me, like the game process. So I ended up signing with a company called Raw Fury, which is like famous indie game publisher, specifically known to have a bunch of games that are kind of weird. They publish games specifically, sort of artistically. They publish a bunch of different games, and after speaking with like 15 different developers that they've worked with, I came to the conclusion that like they are a publisher, and publisher are companies that you should not trust in any way, really, because they are companies. But generally speaking, they are going to let me make the game, and they are going to support me in a reasonable manner to the point. And that's exactly how it's gone. So I'm very happy with them.
I imagine you saw the stuff that happened with Zom, and that was probably very core to why you were so... for those who don't know, Zom was the developer of Disco Elysium, and they basically... Now, there was some controversy with the actual original creator as well, but Zom essentially said, he's not the coolest guy in the world. That gives us the right to take away all of the creative license from everyone who worked on the game. And it was a bunch of... I'm not as well informed on it as I should be, but it was a big situation.
It's a big... There's a great no-clip documentary on YouTube that I recommend. Really good to watch that. Great stuff. But specifically, one of the many reasons why, for example, I own 100% of my company and the IP of this game.
Very smart. Yeah.
Exactly. And like, I could have sold it at some point. I got some offers. It could have been interesting to get some extra money and be able to even make the game better, potentially. But I was lucky enough to never be forced to do that, because I always had enough money to make it by burning my own savings, and also living very cheaply. And also, right at the moment where I actually did run out of money, that was the moment where I was able to sign with Raw Fury. And the month that they got their first payment into my account, that was the month where I was unable to pay rent. So it was like right on the edge. Very fun. Insane timing.
Very close.
Yes, but it's absolutely something that I've always kept in mind, because I've heard so many horror stories, both when it comes to publishers, but also investment, and the fact that making games is an art form, but it is a business. It's specifically a software business, and it's those two things that constantly clash with one another that both make the industry so interesting, but also is the cause of so much drama and so much problem that I was gonna avoid it as long as I could, and I have still been able to avoid it. I'm gonna continue avoiding it for as long as I am able.
Now, do you think with the success of Esoteric Ebb that you'll have a sort of way to cut through that and say, no, look, I did it, I'm proven, let me do what I'm doing, let me cook, basically? Is that an effective tool, or are they still going to be? Do you think they'll still be like, no, we know what gamers want?
It helps. It absolutely helps. It's the same thing with all these indie developers that are making sequels that get even bigger than the first game. It's a situation where usually you don't even need a publisher, and you probably shouldn't have a publisher, arguably, depending on what sort of relationship you have with them. You can probably, if you have the insane amount of money, just hire a few people to do all the stuff that a publisher does for you. And publishers are nice. It's great networking, and especially with Raw Fury, the wonderful people to work with. But arguably, you don't need them if you have the money. You can probably build up the infrastructure yourself, because especially when you're selling on Steam, there's work involved with doing that. But it is so much easier today than it ever has been to just do that. Even on consoles, it's not that complicated. You can build up the structure yourself. It's not like in the 90s where you had to have a publisher to get into physical big box stores, for example. So you have that potential, and that's what most really big indie developers do these days, just so they can keep the cut themselves. So we'll see what I do in the future, but it's gonna be interesting to see.
On the future, can you tell us anything about that, or is that hush hush?
I am usually transparent, because that's just what I do.
Okay, so
people send me emails and I'm like, oh yeah, you want to know what I'm doing? Yeah, I'll tell you. It's fine. So what I'm doing right now is that I'm not sure. It's been about half a month since the game launched. It's going really well. It's not to the point where I'm rich. I am constantly telling people like, oh yeah, it's a success. I'm not rich. I have a job, and that's good. I have a job, but I'm not rich. Thank you.
Hey.
That's the situation, which means that I'm very happy. I'm super happy, especially with the critical reception and the interesting discussion about it. And the game, I'm going to continue working on games for a very long time. But I haven't decided what to do. Yeah.
If the next game isn't Esoteric Ebb 2, will you ever return to that world, either for a direct sequel or for a spin-off where he plays a different class, or, I don't know, the hack and slash for the 3DS we mentioned?
I'm leaning very heavily towards doing something in this universe for sure. There's such a huge potential in it, and it's like I didn't expect it to be this well received, because it's my homebrew world. It's another fantasy world, and while I tried to do my decision when making this game was to at every single turn make the stupidest decision I could possibly do to just make it interesting. Just
That's
anything
D&D,
that
though.
just anything that stands out, just make that and just stick with it. Somehow that worked, but
That's D&D for you. And you
Exactly.
mentioned you are a DM, right? You're running a D&D game.
yes,
And,
I have 3 groups going right now.
Damn, it's a lot of groups. But everything from, let's say, Malazan to Elder Scrolls to Disco Elysium, even a lot of these big fantasy IPs started as D&D games. I'm running a D&D game in a world I hope to write a book in. Did Esoteric
Hey,
Ebb
nice.
start as a D&D game, or is this world entirely new for the game?
Yeah, so it's like half. I made the homebrew specifically so I could play in it, but I also wanted my own world. And specifically, I was so goddamn tired of world building, because I've done world building ever since I was a kid. It's like one of those natural things. And
addictive,
it was
yeah.
just to a certain point. I played all my games in Faerun, because I love Faerun, and Faerun is the like standard,
Classic,
super
yeah.
functional D&D setting. It's like proven. And when I sat down, I was like, well, I kind of need my homebrew, because if I'm gonna work on a game and if I'm gonna keep playing, I probably should. And then I was like, well, I don't want to do it, because I find it so boring to just make another fantasy land. So I was like, okay, how do I make this interesting for myself? And that's how the stupid decision thing came into play. It's like, okay, let's just make the stupidest decisions all along the way and just see where that takes me. But the thing is, I do love the aesthetic of it. I love fantasy lands. I love playing in Faerun. So that it's sort of like, it's not a satire or irony. It's not like, oh, I hate fantasy, but let's make fun of it. It's, I love fantasy. I love dwarves, elves, and knights. And then I want to do something weird and wacky with it, just because it's so much fun.
You do really pull off the weird and wacky, because I love fantasy as well. I get a little turned off when I see a traditional Faerun inspired D&D world. I give Faerun some leeway, because it's the original, or not the original, but it's the current one. But if I pick up a book and it's dwarves and elves and all that, I usually am like, okay, do something original. But your world immediately hooked me, and I think partly because of the art style, partly because of the music. But it was clear that you weren't just trying to tell another story about the 13th Goblin War and so, and this year this became. There's a clear love of that system. There's a clear passion for it, but it's so weird. And I was going to recommend a book series to you if you've not heard. You might have heard it already, because it's very popular. I've seen it mentioned both with Disco Elysium and with Planescape. And I think your game captures it even more. The Perdido Streets or Boss Log trilogy by China Mieville. I have one of the books with me now.
Oh yeah. I haven't read them, but
Yeah,
there
you
you
would
go.
really like them, I think. It didn't show up in my green screen thing. Didn't like it, but I think you'd like that. It's so engrossing. It just immediately hooks you.
So, a little different topic here. The leverage that you've now gained from getting traction. I know that's a bunch of weird words, but yeah, you gained some traction with your game. Now the leverage, that's going to take a lot of that. How am I going to pay the rent? Or you said you just got your first payment right as rent ran out. You're not having to worry about that so much. Do you think that's going to free up your creativity? I know when I don't have as much of a load on me from financial, then I'm free, and I usually do better work. Is that something you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I think so. It's like I've always been the kind of person where there's different types of people, right? There are people that if they don't have a fire under their ass, they're not going to get anything done. And there are people that, as you say, can't get anything done if there's an active fire going on under the ass. It's like those two people sort of exist, and then there's a spectrum. I would say that I am absolutely in the scene where sort of I have a hard time getting stuff done when there's a fire. Because I'm so focused on it. But at the same time, I've sort of trained myself to just ignore fires, because over the years, doing the whole entrepreneur thing of indie game development has forced me to become completely irresponsible with anything financial, which is a stupid thing to say. but it is like
No,
ending up
right
in a
there.
situation where you're unable to pay rent and then just barely slipping by. I wasn't nervous at all at that point. I had no stress. I didn't even worry about it. I was like, it'll work out. I'll solve it somehow. And I have some backup plans. I'm able to do, like, I'm smart. I have some stuff. But no stress. Like, I can't focus on, because if I do that, if I start worrying about anything, I won't, like you say, I won't be able to get anything done. So in order to do that writing where I'm like in the zone of writing 2,000 to 5,000 words a day, which I only can do on like super hardcore days, I need to not worry about stuff. I just need to, be happy and just be able to do it. And that's
Right.
it feels a bit insane to be able, delusional to put yourself in that state, but that's sort of like what I've forced myself to do.
You have to
That
ignore
makes
the
me want to
fire
ask.
to deal with the fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes me want to ask, do you have your relationships, your family? Do you have those knocks on the door in the middle of the night? Like, hey, are we ever going to eat dinner? Or are you ever coming to see your mom? Kind of things like that. Do you have someone in your life that is, pulling you the other direction?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that I that's very, very good. Like I always tell everybody in my life who helps me get out of the dark pit of the writing monkhood is every single one of those people, family, friends, my girlfriend, everybody in my life. They help me so much, because if I can't get out, if I'm unable to take those breaks and just not do a bunch of work, I'm the type of person who's going to keep doing work at all time. Maybe right before this call, it's like 8 o'clock in the evening. Today I happen to not have anything going on, so quite literally I'm just sitting here going like, okay, I could go and chill and watch something. I have a bunch of TV series I want to catch up on. I could, I'm hanging out with the guys on Discord, and they're playing some games, and I'm like, I could play some games. I have a bunch of games I want to play. But instead, I'm sitting here sort of working out details on a bunch of business stuff, because that's just the thing that sort of clicked in my head, and I wanted to do that. And so I need those outings. I need, like you say, people to knock on my door and tell me to stop sometimes. And I always welcome that, because that's really healthy.
Yeah. I have that same problem. I'll be down in this little studio I have in my basement of my house, and I'm if I don't have something to do, I create something. I'm like, oh, you know what? I haven't updated the website. Oh, you know what? I could put this on there. Oh, you know what? And while watching Star Trek or something, so it's
relatable. That's so relatable.
A little bit. That's my that's my downtime. Working. But I do have lots of people in my life knocking on the door. So
yes,
that's great.
And it's good. It's good. There's always a balance, of course. The whole thing of like how much can you actually get done, and that's it is a thing you have to be mindful of to be able to create. But I think the idea of just having, currently I'm working from home. I've worked from home for many years. But it would be more interesting to get a separate space, like an actual workspace, and not just a computer room or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see how the next production goes. This is now Esoteric Ebb is done, and I'm gonna essentially sort of rethink my entire approach to how to actually get the second project, because this is my first project, out the door also. Because the first one wasn't super unhealthy, but it could be healthier. Let's put it like that. So,
well, do you think the second project will take 8 years?
I can imagine the financial part of it will be easier. Starting with nothing, building what you built. Now you should be able to use that leverage to actually start with something financially, and that process should be better, easier, and quicker. Yeah. So, I'm excited for you. I just met you just an hour or so ago, and I think we have a like mind. We're just, like I said, different roads. But it's great to see people, succeeding. In this day and age, it seems like so often people look for reasons to bash someone for trying, getting out there. If there weren't those people in the world, we would have nothing. I'm sure you've heard possibly your girlfriend's dad or your grandfather or somebody saying, why don't you just get a regular job? Why are you trying? But the
That's
great
funny,
the
actually.
people who
My parents are super supportive to everything that all the crazy stuff I do here. But it's always a case where my parents are super smart and down to earth. And when I was doing the crazy part of this whole production, where I admittedly was stupid, I burnt way too much money for a thing that had almost no chance of actually working out, especially before I got traction, proper traction. I was constantly looking for a job, and I took their advice. I tried to balance to make sure that I wouldn't continue if I didn't have that verification in the numbers. But even then, it's my parents always told me to look for other options, make sure I have backup plans, and I appreciate that a lot. But it's always about the balance, right? So you don't get somebody just telling you that you should stop dreaming, but at the same time, be realistic. And I think that's good.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Tristan, what else you got?
Okay, so I'm not sure how much longer do you think we have. I have a bunch of nerdy questions. About an hour-ish. You good for about an hour-ish? Yeah. All right, so this is going to be
an hour now.
Fantasy book Tristan. First thing I want to point out with the game specifically, the dwarves. That is the group you chose to be the minorities in your world, which is something I haven't seen a lot. I've seen orcs and elves and such, but I've never really seen dwarves be treated as that group who is the outsider. Or if they are the outsider, they're the outsiders visiting because they have their cool castles in the mountains. Is there any reason you specifically chose dwarves to kind of represent that part of society, or is it just something different?
Yes, it's an interesting thing where, for example, all the fantasy creatures in this world speak real languages, for one. And that's not necessarily supposed to be a direct allegory to anything. But it sort of ends up being that no matter what you do, which is something I'm trying to be careful about. All the dwarves in this world speak either Swedish, Norwegian, or Danish, for example. And specifically, these dwarves, the ones that speak Swedish specifically, are a bunch of communists that got exiled from under the ground, a long time ago, when their leader called Asgal sort of rose up, created a hyper strong communist state that almost kind of immediately fell apart once he came out of the picture. And all of these Swedish dwarfs, essentially, are a sort of representation of that, I guess, Swedish socialism / left-leaning economy-based vibes, you might say, and a bunch of politics involved with that. What the dwarves then become in that scenario is a mixture with these humans that also arrived in this place, and what those dwarves represents, I suppose, is in a sense the minority of socialism in this situation, but also they have a very strange relationship with the humans, because the humans are also heavily based off the dwarven culture. So it's a very complicated relationship between these two, because these humans are also kind of Viking-esque in their culture and their style, which is obviously also sort of Scandinavian in style. It's a strange scenario, and I like exploring it, and specifically also because in this world, if you have, for example, a dwarf and a human who breed with one another, you get a human that is maybe a bit shorter and a bit hairier. So what happens then is that you have a bunch of interesting socio-political implications that happen, and it's fun to explore that, and it's fun to discuss that, and it's fun to use that to sort of explore an allegory of different nation states and assimilation, and how these cultures interact with one another, and politically as well.
Now, we got very heavily into the politics there for a moment, with the socialism, the communism, the dwarves. Disco Elysium is very notably very pro-communist, also very anti-communist, but in a pro-communist way. I don't think you can be pro-communist without hating communists, from my experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, when you look at other disco-likes are coming out, what is that called? It's the prequel to the Suzerain game. I cannot remember what it's called. But
God. Yes, the one. I know what you're talking about.
I'll throw it up on here when we get to it. Do you think being left-leaning is a core element of the disco-like genre? to a point where you would try to make a game like a disco-like with those other elements, it would fall apart if you were conservative leaning? Or do you think it's just popular with left-leaning creators currently?
That's a very interesting question. I think that there's absolutely a space for non-leftist art, for example. I think the main problem is that, generally speaking, the art tends to be left-leaning for one reason or another. You can discuss why that is.
I can only think of a very interesting question. Yeah, I can only think of a handful of modern conservative art that's very well put together. I think it is very. Yeah, I agree with you there.
It's interesting. I think it has something to do with just a general statistical analysis on like open-ended thought and how that usually ends up represented in the population in more left-leaning politics, for example. An open-ended thought and tends to also align with artistic people, which are the people who ends up as, for example, writers. But it's a very interesting thing to discuss, and specifically what Esoteric Ebb then sort of like becomes in that discussion is an attempt on my part to sort of debate a bunch of different politics, for one. Because I am absolutely very leftist, and I'm absolutely, using that terminology and attempting to use my knowledge in that, which isn't huge, and I'm learning actively, which is so much fun, reading feedback to the game, for example, to try to explore specifically the main theme of the game, which is, I think, like we mentioned before, this whole thing about masculinity, and specifically masculinity and fascism in this sort of narrative, which is why I think a lot of people expected the game to be more left-leaning in the sense that it's focusing on, for example, communism, socialism, and that thing, and there's stuff in there that's about that, for sure, but mostly the game, like the main themes, are more about masculinity and how it translates into and interacts with fascist thought, which is something that I found very interesting myself, too, especially since you're playing as essentially a magical fascist with, the knight and the armor, the fantasy aesthetic of being a strong knight fighting the dragon with a bunch of magical powers, and you're a weapon of the state. And the state in this case is not necessarily fascist, but it's very nationalistic. It's basically a theocracy. And just exploring those different elements of it, it's very interesting for me, which is what kept me writing it so long.
One thing I liked so far about it especially is, you pull the Disco Elysium thing of your stats talk to you, and all of them have different personalities. And strength, the D&D stat of strength is a lot of times representative of masculinity. It's not solely I'm a fascist, I'm going to put my boot down. There is elements in the strength, when it's talking to you of, we should be there to protect people, we should do this, we should do this. You're portraying it less as it's innately toxic, more so that it is something that has been, at least in my interpretation, something that's been twisted by the state, take this force that can be done good or bad, has been directed to kind of enforce this system. And I might be misinterpreting, but that's something I've known.
No, I would agree with that interpretation for sure. And I think my attempt was essentially to ask, I'm looking at stuff to make it interesting, right? So same thing with the world building and the setting. I'm trying to take all the stuff that's fun, the archetypical knights and elves and dwarves, and then do a thing that's interesting. Not necessarily subvert, but rather just do something that doesn't feel boring to me. And in my eyes, when I thought about, okay, I'm going to present the part of the protagonist's psyche that represents strength, and let's do something that's, what is that? Well, it's masculinity, it's theocracy, it's the believing in God, it's the following the state being lawful. Since I'm trying to write all of these different aspects from the perspective of what if they were right? What if they are fundamentally not necessarily good, but what if they were right? What if the person inside of Ryan actually is trying to struggle between these different ideals, including stuff like capitalism, left-leaning stuff, wanting to be, super guttural and just instinctual, hedonistic, basically, and also being completely sociopathic and just saying whatever you have to in order for
the drama stat,
charisma, yes,
or not drama, the charisma,
exactly, and strength is then the representation of just doing masculinity in a way that's interesting, And for me, the least interesting way to represent strength in that case would be to go, masculinity is toxic and bad. The most interesting thing would be to go, hey, all of these things that we sort of see as both fascist and also masculine negativity, toxic masculinity, how do we represent that in a way that's, first of all, you have to step through those things in order to get to the point, but how do we represent masculinity in a way that's actually good? What is positive masculinity? And how do we step through all the toxic stuff in order to get there? And how do we do that without saying that masculinity itself is bad, like fundamentally? And that's really difficult to do because
it really is.
Which is a weird thing to say. Like, why is that fundamentally a difficult thing to even ask?
Well, I think I've obviously given my very leftist take, which I don't think we have. I probably would only do too much of that, but I do think that I think fascism is very good at nailing one concept to another, to making it hard to separate them. It's very good at saying this is what it is to be a man, and it makes it really hard for people to look at a man and see anything but that, including the man who's been pinned to. It's very hard for a man to look at himself and say, I'm anything other than this absolute stoicism that never shows pain and is never willing to be vulnerable. And that's the greatest, get really political here, but I guess it's fitting for the episode. That's the greatest weapon of fascism, is that ability.
It's like aesthetically, the power of fascism is specifically that it's pure aesthetics, which means that it's amazing at PR. It's able to sell an idea like that. It's like, I have this artwork, for example, 2 Crowns by Dixie. It's like, big knight on a horse, king, the wise king. The image of that is so evocative, and it's sort of purely romanticized fascist in a sense, you know, the whole king ruling over everybody. But that's the thing. It's like PR. It's a beautiful image of something. It's the knight. It's the thing you're playing in Esoteric Ebb. Whilst leftism has a tendency to be sort of inverted in that, it's sort of purely. They have really good, like communism specifically had some really good PR to some degree. But generally speaking, today I would say that leftism sort of eats itself instead by just being super bad at PR. Like the fact that they're unable to sell leftism as a function to young men, for example, I think that's entirely a sort of aspect of that fact that they are unable to just sell it from a PR perspective. Like, how do you tell a young man that leftism is objectively good for you when nobody's going to believe them in a statistical sense?
Yeah, and then you have a lot of young men who then feel abandoned because the PR, they're not being come at as, hey, this system's bad for you too, we want to help you. Or even when they are, it's very easy for fascism to come in and say, no, they want to look how hard you're working, and they still don't like you. That's very effective. So
it's a very difficult thing to discuss back and forth, just because it's such a complicated scenario, and that's why Esoteric Ebb was fun to write, because I'm trying to like put that in a scenario where it's sort of fantastical and extreme, and then just go, oh, yeah. I wonder what would happen if this would actually happen.
But on the opposite end, though, with wisdom, the sort of counter to strength.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
I love wisdom. I think it's so well written. In your personal opinion, is wisdom ever wrong? Like the in-game wisdom, is that the voice in your head? Is it ever telling you the wrong thing? Is it ever being too, I guess, lack of better words, is it being too woke? Is it ever bringing it? Is it never? Yeah, you know what I mean.
Wisdom is 100% correct all the time, but kind of most of the voices in your head kind of ends up being that from the perspective of that particular character, which aren't like objectively, they might be wrong from like a information perspective, what reality actually is, statistical, whatever, but they are absolutely the truth in that scenario. So wisdom, I would say, is if you're a person who is purely empathetic and purely like in that sense, generally in the definition of Esoteric Ebb, good. And goodness in Esoteric Ebb is defined as caring more about the other than the self, and that includes everyone around yourself as well, on a spectrum. So if you basically give up your own possessions in order to give to people who are complete strangers to you, you are objectively good, and like the extreme of wisdom would essentially land at that point at some point, and that's good. That's really good. Oh my god, that's the nicest person in the world. But that doesn't sound very healthy. And then the question is, why isn't that healthy? Well, I mean, it's obvious, right? But is it? And then we can have a discussion about it. That's the fun part about wisdom.
And you have the elements where they kind of balance each other out, because, strength and wisdom are, the kind of opposites of the same coin. But if you are, let's say you have a pure wisdom person with no strength, and you're always kind, you're always nice, someone's going to keep advantage of you and keep taking advantage of you until they leave you in a position where you're unable to be nice anymore. You need to have a little bit of saying, wait a second, I care about myself because I help other people. So I got to make sure I'm in a position to help other people. I can't put, and I don't know if you have like a canon route in your head, like how things actually go in canon, but I feel like the canon class has to be, is it the primal cleric or is it the esoteric cleric? I can't remember. It's the one.
Yeah, the preset. That's the first one, right? The strength and wisdom one.
Yeah, it's strength and wisdom.
I don't have a canon
one.
I would absolutely say that there's no canon. It's like you're able to. It's just a split timeline, and all of them sort of coalesce in the end.
Yeah.
But personally, I think that the primal cleric wisdom strength is one of the more interesting choices in the game, just because you get the clash between those two.
I think it shows how they're kind of necessary for each other. If you have one without the other, you're going to screw your life up, and probably the lives of people around you.
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially, yeah. I guess in certain circumstances, having more of one is much more useful.
And they're like masculine and feminine. Those are like the aspects of inside a man, masculine and feminine, and try to hit those two against each other. It's fun.
I think that's especially.
I heard a little saying the other day that kind of plays into this, and I've heard this. It's a biblical saying where it says, "Love those as you love yourself." But then it says, "But even more importantly, love yourself as you love those." And I think that's a key to what you guys are saying there. In a little bit off the point of I know kind of what the story's trying to tell is. Yes, we have to care. But you have to include yourself in that. Just because you're this particular left or right or whatever, you can get caught up in that, and you can be labeling yourself that way, and it makes it hard for you to, like Tristan was saying, toxic masculinity. Younger men coming up in today's world, if they have some kind of a masculine tendency, then that they feel toxic, and so therefore, how do you love yourself when you're being labeled like that? I think we have to and then the same thing on the other end. It's if you're labeled yourself as a extreme leftist, then any extreme of that label tends to be in your own psyche. You can't get it out. This is what I am, so then I should hate myself for this, or I should like myself for that. I think it's just boils it down to the point of, you gotta take some self-reflection and take care of yourself as well.
If you don't, you're doing fascism's jobs for it. You're applying those concepts to yourself. That the government doesn't even have to step down to convince you that you're that. I mean, they probably have a part in putting you in the environment, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole thing of if you're this, guy, then you're weak. If you don't get up and you don't work and you don't bleed and you don't sweat, you're weak. And then, but then the other thing is, if you're over here this, then you're just you're dumb. You're not smart. You're a bullhead. You're bullish. Those labels just are very hard for people to get around, even for themselves, if they labeled themselves something. From my generation, especially growing up, we were, suck it up, buttercup, get to work, Oh, yeah. I ain't got time to bleed, that kind of stuff. And it's still to this day. I mean, and I will give you this from wisdom, from dealing with that my entire life. It's it's hard to ever get rid of. Once it's instilled, you can't. It's hard to get up and say, "Well, I'm just going to hang out here today and maybe play some games." But then before you know it, you're beating yourself up. What is wrong with you? So yeah, I'm glad to see that your game is maybe highlighting some of those issues that's out there.
I hope so. It's interesting to see if it's done well, because I don't know, right? Until it's released and people actually wrestle with it, you have no idea if you're writing a bunch of crazy bullshit or if you're actually saying something that's interesting. And hopefully over the years it's gonna show that I did a good job. And if I didn't, I want to learn and I want to see if I can make it more interesting on the next one.
Yeah, I think also
I'm excited
with the comparing to Disco Elysium, which I don't want to do too much. It's its own thing. You clearly have a love of that game, but it's its own thing.
Oh, yeah.
But I think one of the things you do well is you do say it's its own thing. You go all these different directions. And a big element of Disco Elysium with Harry, your character in that game, is he is innately misogynistic. And you can push against that. You can have him realize, wait a second, no, I shouldn't hate women. There's something wrong in here. There's trauma and all this, and I need to grow from it. The cleric is almost more of a simp. I think there's the line of, you say, I like women. And it goes, your thoughts are like, no, you love women. This idea of, and I've not gotten that far in the game.
To a toxic degree, and that was on purpose, because I wanted to differentiate it from Disco Elysium to the point where mechanically, design-wise, it's very similar in so many different ways. But when it comes to tone and style of writing, like what I put into it, I wanted to purposefully avoid pretty much every single thing that's like thematically focused on in Disco Elysium. To just get a new spin on it. And one of those things was specifically to take, in Disco Elysium you play as a jaded man who has had a rough life, and he's beaten down. In this game you are playing as, you're still kind of jaded, sure, but you are essentially very naive 20-something guy who's completely green on so many different levels. And it's just an entirely different perspective.
I think I really represent that with the your interactions with the goblins is one of my favorites, because I'm playing my cleric, a very annoying philosopher. He's always asking the what if questions, always trying to get really deep in, but he has no actual social skills, super low drama, and you let you do that. And my favorite form of that is when you meet a goblin character, you can try to be really inclusive and like, oh, I love your culture and all that, in the same way that a weeaboo going to Japan is like, oh, I love Japanese culture. I've watched so many anime and all that. Like it's cringy in the best way possible, and it feels like there's a lot of room to grow. He doesn't feel hostile. You can choose to hate goblins, but that route doesn't feel hostile. It just feels naive. Like he doesn't I love that about it. It's so fun.
Cool.
It's a very interesting thing to balance too, and it's fun to hear how people react to it, and just watch streams and stuff. It's so much fun.
And I was going to say one more thing about comparing it to Disco Elysium. I'm trying not to, but
no, please do.
The art of Disco Elysium was and the music and the art was very key to what that game was so strong. You also have very strong art direction, very strong music, but in a different route. I would almost compare Esoteric Ebbs, like especially the stat art, like the more visualization, closer to a mix of biblical art and like old school D&D, like those black and white textbook or handbooks.
Yes,
it stands out so strong, and it's really every time any of your stats pop up. Go ahead, sorry.
I worked really hard to try to find like the right artist for it, and I ended up just DMing my illustrator Oscar Westberg one day and was like, "Hey, do you want to kind of work on this?" And he was like, "Yes," and we worked together for 4 years now.
It's perfect.
So he's just amazing. He's got the perfect style of comic, light-hearted, colorful, with a sense of grit from sort of original D&D stuff. It's very, very, very cool to see.
And the music, man. That
so
told
good.
me it.
I was in a cold. I got a cold email from in Danish in my spam folder like 4 years ago, 4.5, and I was like, oh, accidentally saw that a day before it got deleted, and I opened it, and I translated it because I can't actually read Danish. I can understand it, but I can't read it. And it was a message from Anders, and he basically went something along the lines of, "Oh, really cool project, and I think Esoteric Ebb deserves more than generic fantasy music." And at that point, I'd spoken with a bunch of really cool composers, but every single one of them sort of pitched a generic fantasy music thing to me, and I wanted something that was more electronic and weird, more esoteric, whatever that means. And Anders was the perfect guy for it. He made like really cool auditory sort of noise music stuff, experimental music. And I told him basically, I love your stuff. Help me make the most mainstream sort of soundtrack that you can, and we're gonna land in somewhere that's super interesting. And that's what ended up happening.
I have
really
never
amazing.
heard synth sound so hopeful. Like the way it comes in with the opening, you just feel like, oh, there's still something left here, and it's perfect at that.
Oh, it's so good.
So I don't know how much time we have left, so I'm going to ask one more question, and it's a question I've asked every like artist we've had on. So we're going to have to pull away from like politics and theology and philosophy. I'm going to ask you a really dumb, nerdy question, okay?
I'll do it.
So, are you familiar with like the whole like who would win subreddit and like Death Battle and all that, like that online Hulk versus Superman playground arguments?
Sure.
So you know the show Death Battle, where they take that and they do all like the crazy math research, and if you could have any character from Esoteric Ebb on the show, who would they fight and who would win?
I feel like there's a snail man in the game, a very, very powerful wizard snail man. I would want him to fight somebody, but I can't figure out who. Because we're talking about a wizard that's able to, warp reality through incredible magic.
Like a Vecna level threat, not like
exactly. Oh god, you know what? Isk against Vecna would be cool. Snail man going up. It's such a ridiculous image too.
I would love to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, Vecna, die. He's gonna.
Get him, yeah. I mean, he always does lose. Narrative the whole plot.
He does. Yeah, he always comes back too. So.
True. I was, in my head, because it's the obvious comparison, imagining the cleric versus Harry, but one of them has magic, the other one might just be crazy. So I think there's a clear edge there. That's
true. I'm sure that would be an interesting scrap, at least, for sure.
On that note, though, something I was going to mention earlier. You said, I remember you mentioning, there's not a lot of combat in this game. I was playing it not expecting combat. You lied to me. Some guy pulled a knife on me. I didn't expect that.
Oh yeah, it's fake combat. That's the whole thing, right? It's trying to simulate the feeling of playing D&D, where you're making different decisions and you're doing stuff, but the actual system isn't there. So what I have done is like basically just a very complex, it's way too complex. It's a headache-inducing system of making different choices, which changes DCs on separate choices, and do rounds per round, and you go in the turn order like you're supposed to, but it's just handled in the dialogue system. Very strange system.
Combat in D&D, it's not real either.
That's true.
I have never shot a fireball.
That's why people sort of like it. I guess it's, but specifically when it comes to marketing, what we talked about before, I can't say that there's combat in the game, because then people are going to be disappointed.
It's not a standard. You walk around, you find an enemy, and you fight it. There are combat encounters, but they are story encounters solely.
Exactly. And it's fun. It's gonna be fun in my next project, because I'm gonna take that and like try to do something new with it and try to expand on it and try to sort of solidify it. That's gonna be really fun, because I just experimented with that system all throughout Esoteric Ebb, so it's like it got better.
I'm very excited to see where that goes.
Yeah.
Are you sticking with fantasy?
Potentially, it depends. I'm gonna decide in like a month or so, like what actually is gonna be the next project, and I'm looking forward to that. It's gonna be fun.
Do you have any like contenders before we let you off? Sorry, for like what the next one is.
A sequel will be potential, because like people just like the sequel. Also, I have a bunch of old projects, like a sci-fi project that could be really cool. But at the same time, doing genre might be fun to do something smaller that's not genre, something like more literary in a sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it all depends on like from a financial perspective. Could be smart to just do something that's sort of like safe and works. So, but we'll see.
Nothing wrong with safe, I'm looking forward to whatever it is.
Well, I'm going to play Esoteric Ebb tonight after a few rounds of Fortnite.
Hey, I'm probably same.
Hope you get a W.
No, I will definitely play it tonight.
Fortnite win.
Like I said before you guys were ever even thought about it, I was playing Bard's Tale on Commodore.
Oh yeah, and Bard's Tale is so good.
You hear the music, that's the traditional. I guess that's where all that kind of fantasy gameplay music came from. But anyways, it's been really great having you on, Mr. Bodyguard.
Thank you.
as your dad would say. Christopher, excited. I'm always excited for people thriving and just pushing through and beating the odds. So congratulations on the success of your game, and I hope it continues. And the next one we get to talk to you about, you'll be in your brand new studio with your all your team behind you.
Fingers
I'm
crossed.
excited to see all that happen for you.
For sure.
Yeah. And tell your girlfriend that we appreciate her letting you spend this time with us.
Yes.
And,
Absolutely,
take her
yeah.
out to dinner.
It was really cool.
I'll let her know tomorrow for sure.
All right, great. Well, yeah, I know Tristan. I jumped in a few times, but I think Tristan really enjoyed this. You guys,
I was very excited for this one. Yeah.
There was some foreign language there that I missed. I couldn't really understand what y'all were talking about, but I enjoyed it. I did enjoy the time. So, and again, good luck with everything, and hopefully see you next time.
For sure.
All right.
Great questions. Really
thank you,
fun
sir.
to talk about.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah.
Yeah, my questions were good. Tristan's were interesting. Mine were good.
Yeah, that was all right.
They were interesting.
I was asking the questions I was thinking of while playing the game. That was
But
the
that's
fun part.
exactly. Yeah, I think it went well. Yeah, we kind of got.
I was playing the game. I was like, oh, I wonder what he thought here. I was like, oh shit, I can just ask him tomorrow. That's kind of cool.
Nice.
It was a fun experience.
Yeah, and I was wondering how do you make any money doing this? So it was a good.
Hey,
I think it was a good time.
All
All right, guys.
thanks, man.
Thanks a lot.
It's great having you on.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.